editorial director of the Architecture Review and Architecture Journal. Can you start?
Yeah, I can't work these things. I don't do that.
Okay. I need help to escape. Okay. Here we go.
I just wanted to show, I have 5 slides, and I was thinking about this question of what it is that Western architects do when they start working in Asia or the Far East. Is it a similar condition? Is it different? What are the responses? And I started with Petronas Towers' homage to Ken Yang. And so I'm thinking about now, Cesar Pelli had never designed anything like this when he went to KL. He'd done many buildings which are more or less identical, Battery Park City, and of course in London, the Canary Wharf Tower. So he went out of his comfort zone here and he did something different. My conclusion from this is essentially, you know, this is a condition of postmodernism with a small p, where you're looking for difference and you find your inspirations from something, from local culture, from regional culture, and you produce an architecture which is quite different stylistically from anything you've done before. Bearing in mind, of course, that inside the building exactly the same. It's air conditioned, it's all that stuff which we were introduced to by modernism and the kind of industrial culture and lift technology. It nevertheless marks something quite different, quite apart from the fact that it was very tall and that it was a twin. And of course, it becomes a phenomenon, especially when it involves a film with Sean Connery. So the next example, this is Zaha Hadid Opera House, Gwangju. Is this a completely different thing? No, it is not. Zaha, being one of the 3 global architecture brands, being my proposition, Frank Gehry, Norman Foster, Zaha Hadid, in a league of their own, they appear in different magazines to the other kind of superstars in our world like Rem or Jacques or Jean, etc., etc., etc. But those 3 have a kind of preeminence, and if you get to preeminence, of course, you do not have to respond to local culture or local conditions. What you do is you bring your brand to the locality. And if you believe in parametricism, you will have no problem getting out your Google map and with the benefit of being able to work with the technology from London, you don't even have to go there. You can digitize the ground plane, you can feed in anything you want, and you can get the desired result once your eye tells you it's that option rather than one of the other 20,000 that in theory you can roll out if you so wish. This is very, very powerful architecture. It's taking place all over the world, and I would argue that it's kind of indistinguishable in the work that office was doing in Europe, especially in relation to ground and landscape, has just fed into a series of these extraordinary projects. So Zaha and Patrick Schumacher have marched across the world, conquering everything, and good luck to them. But it's a very different model to Cesar looking for a little bit of regional inspiration to tweak the idea of the high-rise tower. Now here's another example, another AA alumnus and teacher, Danny Libeskind in Singapore. This is not the Danny Libeskind of the Ground Zero Tower. This is a kind of response to, I suppose, a sort of tropical climate, taking inspiration from wavy trees and the water, and I would think of this as a kind of in-betweening. Yes, it is kind of recognisably in a tradition of certain Libeskind works, but on the other hand, it's not exactly imposing a recognisable brand style onto a new location. To me, this is a curious sort of building. I'm not quite sure what it's telling us. It's very powerful in its context. It's made its mark. It's particular, but I wouldn't expect to see this as a model run out all over the world by any means. Now the next one, still in Singapore, this is Gardens by the Bay. This is by Wilkinson Eyre, a rather extraordinary project which is the reverse of a kind of Kew Gardens, European winter gardens, in that everything has to be put the other way round. So the plants in here don't need heat from sunlight, what they need is coolth. But because these architects and environmental engineers are environmentally correct, they can't do it by using air conditioning. And that's why you have to have an extraordinary, an expanse, a serpentine system below ground, use of desiccants to do things to the air to cool it down, and the upshot of it all is that you get non-air conditioned cool air going into the extraordinary greenhouses, so that plants that could not survive in Singapore's normal climate can certainly survive in these sort of greenhouses. And you say, well, this is an extraordinary thing, this is a one-off, this is something that can only happen in the tropics. Not at all true, because the precedent for this is a tiny little greenhouse at Kew Gardens called the Alpine House, done by the same architects. It's a tiny little pavilion, and their problem there was, how can you allow people to see plants that come from the mountains when in fact what normally happens in the greenhouses at Kew is that you need heat and moisture. And basically that was a tiny prototype for this rather heroic project we see here, which incidentally is on something that we used to do in London but kind of don't do it anymore, but they're certainly doing it in Singapore, which is the exploitation of land, or the creation of new ground. And what better thing to put on the creation of new ground than something that is almost entirely about nature. Now my final slide is actually not a Western architect bringing something to Asia, but this is Japanese architects and engineers, Nick and Seke, with their Sky Tower project, which is an extraordinary addition to the Tokyo skyline. And by their own account, what they've taken is ideas that stem from, the Japanese temple tradition, that tradition that Bruno Taut got slightly wrong in his examinations of structural form, as we now know. But I think that even here you say, well, actually here are Japanese architects, and they don't have, it's enough to take their own traditions to produce their own icon. But of course you couldn't help observing that actually Mr. Eiffel had his Eiffel Tower replicated in some ways in that Tokyo Tower near the Imperial Hotel, the site of Frank Lloyd Wright's Imperial Hotel. So there's this kind of strange historical link of Lloyd Wright doing his hotel, not destroyed in the Great Earthquake, but destroyed to make way for a bigger building decades later, pretty good on seismic. And then actually in some sort of weird sort of Western connection, there's this equivalent of the Eiffel Tower built very nearby, and then we flip forward the best part of a century, and we end up with something which needs to find its inspiration from something even older. So I think my conclusion about influences is that they're not simple, whether you're working at home or whether you're working abroad. And you couldn't any longer say, as the postmodernists did, when Graves and Gehry and Eisenman were building Euro Disney, that actually it was just an example of what we were going to have. The future was going to be the same difference everywhere. That was going to be the postmodern condition. But I think, in fact, what has happened, we're not getting the same difference everywhere. Sometimes we do, maybe with McDonald's and with certain hotel chains, but sometimes we don't. And the idea that Western architects now go to Asia and impose a kind of neo-colonialist 21st century form of tropical architecture is no longer the case. It's more subtle, I would say, or at least more complex than that. Thank you.